Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be reviewing the entire Murderbot series. It's going to be spoiler free, and I will also be reviewing the latest novella in the series, Fugitive Telemetry, which should be coming out the day after I post this on Friday. Shout out to Tor and Net Galley for sending me an e-arc of Fugitive Telemetry, and thank you to all of my lovely subscribers who have put me in this position where I can actually receive advanced reader copies of books that I am actually really excited about. So thank you, stick around, and I hope you enjoy this video. I was trying to think of the feelings that I feel when I think of Murderbot, and the best way I can describe it to someone who hasn't read the series is, do you remember when in 2018 the Mars rover Opportunity died, so to speak? The last transmission that it sent was, "My battery is low and it's getting dark," and like people all over the world just collectively mourned for this bot. Obviously, it wasn't sentient, it didn't actually say that. In fact, "my battery is getting low and it's getting dark" was a human translation of the data that it had been sending. Regardless, it really tapped into a feeling that I think is only going to get more and more relevant as technology continues to advance. Like, obviously, we're a far way off from advanced artificial intelligence and all of that, but it's not too far-fetched to imagine that one day there might be artificial intelligence and robots that are actually sentient, who can feel things and feel emotions. How will we as humans treat those robots? And more importantly, perhaps, how will corporations treat those robots? Those are just some of the questions that Martha Wells grapples with in her series, The Murderbot Diaries. The world that Martha Wells imagines in this series is heavily dominated by corporate exploitation, human drama, and lots of robots. The titular character Murderbot fits into all of this as a construct that was made of organic human parts, but also combined with engineered robotic components. And personally, I find the interplay of Murderbot's more human aspects with its more robot engineered aspects to be really interesting. And I think that Wells does a particularly good job of making Murderbot feel like it is genuinely its own unique thing. It's not like a human masquerading as a robot or vice versa. And throughout the series, that's kind of the main motivation for Murderbot. It doesn't know what it wants. And so as it builds its relationships with humans and bots alike, it starts to develop its own sense of identity, which I oddly found really relatable. It's kind of like a coming of age story in a weird way, because Murderbot starts off in All Systems Red incredibly confused and like not having a lot of answers and reasonably being very distrustful of humans because of the way it's been treated in the past. And then over the series, you kind of see it developing genuine friendships with humans, and that to me is one of my favorite things about this series, is the way that these relationships develop and how organic they seem. And I just really love the begrudging affection that Murderbot feels towards a lot of humans. I find it really fascinating because obviously Murderbot is not human, but it has a lot of emotions. You know, just because it has no gender and it doesn't have any romantic feelings, that doesn't mean that it has no feelings at all. And it actually does feel a lot of things that are very interesting to read as a human, obviously. I think that Martha Wells does a fantastic job of capturing that sort of nuance, I guess, with this character. Another thing that I love about Murderbot is just how funny it is as a series and as a character. I think that Murderbot is so hilarious, and it only gets better as the series goes on. I mean, comedy to me is just, the more you build on a joke and the more you build on a bit, it just becomes funnier and funnier. So like, the more books you read, the more the humor grows on you. And I mean, I already enjoyed the humor in the first book. Another theme that's repeatedly brought up throughout the series is this idea of capitalism, corporatism being bad. Like, I know that's very general and broad, but you know, this world is very heavily dominated by corporations. In fact, there's an entire subsection of this galaxy that's called the Corporation Rim, and there's indentured servitude, and it's really bad. I mean, Murderbot itself was a slave, and it was created for this purpose of, you know, being a sec unit, but all this time it has its own emotions and its own desires. It is sentient. It's an actual person. It might not be a human, but it is a person. I think that the critique of capitalism and of you know, corporate culture is really interesting to me. But what I really appreciate is that it never quite descends into pessimism or just complete nihilistic, like,
oh, the world sucks, like capitalism bad, like nothing is ever going to be good.
That's not really the case. In fact, there's a very prevailing sense of optimism and of hope, and there's a very strong counterpoint to that corporate culture that you kind of get to learn about over the course of the series. A lot of movies and books often will like point out a problem in society, but they won't go so far as to like provide a solution. And you know, I still think that that's valid. Like, you don't have to provide a solution. Sometimes just pointing out that there is a problem is its own challenge, and it's very hard to even achieve that. But I did really appreciate there was a counterpoint and a sort of solution to the critique that Martha Wells makes in this book. I hope that makes sense the way I'm explaining it. It's a bit hard to get into it without going into spoilery territory, but yeah, that was something I really liked about the series. I don't know if I've mentioned this yet, but I highly recommend the audiobooks. I listened to the first 4 novellas as an audiobook, and then I read Network Effect and Fugitive Telemetry as an ebook. And while I enjoyed both formats, I just think that Murderbot is so funny. And then when you add in the extra layer of the performance done by the narrator, Kevin R. Free, it just takes it to the next level because the narrator has such good comedic timing and it just makes it so much more funnier. I just love the narrator for the audiobook. So that was kind of like a general overview. I did want to kind of describe the way that the novellas work. Generally, with each novella, it's very episodic, and you know, I think it's funny because Murderbot itself really likes to watch these like soap operas, essentially, and I kind of think of the books themselves as like episodes in this like sort of space soap opera. Each book follows Murderbot on a mission, and generally it wraps up pretty cleanly, but there is several storylines that weave through each novella. So that's why I would recommend that you read each novella in order. They kind of do work as standalones, but not really. I think that if you want the full Murderbot experience, definitely read them in order. And actually, I would highly recommend that you read Fugitive Telemetry before you read Network Effect. But yeah, I really do like the novella aspect of these books because I think it's a nice break from like the super long fantasy series. And if you are working your way through like Wheel of Time right now and you're like, I don't really want to get started on another big fantasy series, but you do want to break up the monotony, I think that this would be a really good series to do it with because it's not a huge commitment. It's just a novella, a couple hundred pages. And yeah, it'll be a really nice sort of palate cleanser in between the big books that you're reading. So now that we've talked about the novellas, I want to talk about the novel Network Effect for a little bit. And while I overall really enjoyed this novel, I think that it magnified a certain problem that I had with the novellas, which wasn't as big a problem because they were just so short. And that is that I personally don't really like the way that Martha Wells writes action, and specifically from the perspective of Murderbot. Action scenes tend to be very wordy and just very technical. Like when a lot of action starts happening, Murderbot itself is like supposed to be this robot who can process a lot of information and, you know, like just take in a lot of information at the same time, which is kind of a gag throughout the series, is that Murderbot is like processing all this stuff and like reading super fast, but like humans are obviously like super slow at reading, so it's like frustrated with how slow humans are. So it's kind of funny that I have this problem with the action scenes, but I already am not someone who enjoys action scenes, so reading the action scenes with like how technical they can get, and just like there's a lot of stuff going on with drones, and sometimes like Murderbot will be like hacking a system at the same time while it's fighting a bunch of people, and it's just a lot. It's a lot. And I will say that I think this is a personal problem. I don't think that these scenes are badly written. I just think that they are not written in a way that jives with my sensibilities, and I think that someone else might actually love these scenes. So if you're like an action junkie, I think that the action in Murderbot has a really amazing sense of movement and fluidity, and I do appreciate that, but personally it's just action isn't my thing, and I'm very picky when it comes to action. However, that being said, there was a lot of other stuff going on in this book that wasn't action oriented that I did love, and that was specifically the world building and the character development in this book is so good. In regards to the world building, obviously in the novellas you get very small pieces of world building and it's sort of developed a little bit over time, but in this book you really do get a lot of history and backstory on the way this world works, and I feel like it's the perfect example of, you know, the tip of the iceberg where Martha Wells only shows you like this much, but you get the sense that there's like all of this other stuff going on underneath the surface. I mean, I was reading an interview with her and it seems like she herself hasn't actually developed all of that, but when you're reading it, it does feel like you're in this really interesting, expansive world, and I really enjoyed that about this book. Another thing I mentioned was the character work. There's a certain character who shows up first in the second novella who makes a return in this book, and I loved it. I loved that relationship between Murderbot and this certain character was so interesting. It actually reminded me a lot of Fitz and the Fool from Farseer in a really weird way, where it's just that kind of relationship where I don't have a word for what it is. Like, it's not a romantic relationship, it's not a sibling relationship, it's genuinely a very unique sort of relationship dynamic that I've never read before. I don't know how to describe them, but it's so beautiful and it's so heartwarming. I also think that Murderbot itself gains so much nuance and becomes so much more complex as it learns more about itself in this book. You know, one of the golden rules of writing, I think, is like show, don't tell. And I think often in this series specifically, like Murderbot will tell you something instead of showing it to you. And instead of that being a bad thing, I actually think that's a really good aspect of the series, because Murderbot itself is a very self-aware character. So it's very assertive and clear about the things that it likes and dislikes, but then there's other things and other aspects about itself that it doesn't know where it stands on. And I think in this book, Murderbot comes to a lot of conclusions about itself that are very, very interesting, and it was just really satisfying to see that character growth and development. And that brings us to Fugitive Telemetry, the latest novella in the series. I think that if you like Murderbot, you're gonna like the series. Like, this isn't gonna be a make or break book. It's pretty straightforward and it's very, on brand for the previous novellas in the series. It's not anything groundbreaking. But personally, I don't know if it's just recency bias, but I do think that Fugitive Telemetry might be my favorite novella in the series so far. A large part of that might have to do with the fact that it has the least amount of action in any novella so far. And as I explained earlier on in this video, I don't like action. But in this book, it's mostly just a murder mystery. So it's mainly just Murderbot kind of like thinking to itself, and like there's a lot more like human conflict, interpersonal conflict that I really enjoyed. I really like when Murderbot comes into contact with like people who don't know how to act towards it. I find it really fascinating, the different ways that humans react to it. And some humans are like immediately cool with it and others are like obviously very distrustful of it. And there's a lot of that in this book. And I really hope that future novellas take the same direction. I could see a lot more of this in the future for Murderbot. I will say that it was a bit disorienting to go from Network Effect to Fugitive Telemetry. The events of this book take place before Network Effect, so going back in time was a little weird, especially considering Murderbot's character arc in Network Effect. It was a little weird to like go back to pre-Network Effect Murderbot, but I kind of got over it after like the first 50 pages. One thing that I think people might find a little disappointing, that I myself was a little disappointed by, was that Murderbot doesn't really interact with the sort of main cast of characters. It mainly interacts with two new characters, which I ended up really enjoying. Overall, the plot was super interesting and I really liked the addition of the new characters. It was a classic, solid, good Murderbot novella. I do wonder if there's gonna be any more installments in the series and if the future novellas will take place after Network Effect or not, because the way that things leave off at the end of Network Effect, I really want to know what happens next. So hopefully we do eventually get more Murderbot content post Network Effect, but yeah. So yeah, that was my very first time reviewing an entire series. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you hadn't read the series, I hope that you kind of got a little bit of information and now you can kind of make up your mind on whether or not the series is for you. Personally, like I said, I really enjoy it for the most part, and I am very thankful again to Tor and Net Galley for sending me the e-arc for Fugitive Telemetry. I mean, I would have bought the book anyways on the day it came out, so that was very kind of them, and thank you so much to all of you again for putting me in this position where I can receive arcs, and that is so cool to me. Thank you so much to all of you for supporting this channel. If there's anything about this review that I think I could have done better or you'd like me to elaborate on, I'm happy to do that in the comments. Please feel free to let me know. And yeah, thanks so much for watching. Take care, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!